So today we're going to talk about representation as well as apportionments, or currently they're called connectional mission giving. We're going to start with representation. As you noted, as we talked about last week, there is this Episcopal system where there's a bishop and district superintendents in local churches, and there's this kind of horizontal way of talking about the United Methodist Church. You may know the history of the United Methodist Church parallels quite well with, there's a good analog to the history and development of the United States of America, frankly. Those histories are kind of parallel, and they manifest themselves in the structure of the United Methodist Church in unique ways. So just as the United States has different branches of government, so do we. We have a Supreme Court. It's not called the Supreme Court, it's Judicial Council. Just as we have states, we have annual conferences. Just as we don't have a president of the United Methodist Church, but we have a college of bishops, right? Council of bishops. Well, there's also something very similar called the House of Representatives in the United States and the Senate. We have something called General Conference. That's the legislative body of the United Methodist Church. And just as there's representation in the United States for those legislative bodies, so too there is representation from every church as a part of this Episcopal system to the United Methodist Church's legislative body. Now, it's vastly impossible to have one representative from the 30,000 churches that are across the United States to be present at the General Conference. That's not how that works, right? So there's conferences break out into areas, and those areas have what are called delegates. Those delegates work their way and represent every annual conference at a jurisdictional level as well as the general or the global level. Are you with me so far? Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Your delegate count for every annual conference is based on membership totals for that annual conference. And then there's some calculus that's done so that around the world there's roughly 850 general conference delegates. Okay? Those delegates are split in half, not by gender, but by clergy and laity. For every clergy representative at any conference, there is a lay counterpart, equal parts. So, taking it all the way down to just the annual conference level, which we just concluded our annual conference, the meeting of the Central Texas Conference, they met Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, right? Now, simple math. At Keller United Methodist Church, we have 5 appointed clergy. How many laity do we get? 5, which meant we have 10 delegates, okay? However, there are other retired clergy that connect with our church who are retired. They don't have a church that they serve. And there were 6 other clergy that are connected to Keller United Methodist Church who are retired, right? As a result, the question becomes, well, what do we do at an annual conference level when we have 6 extra clergy? Where do those lay delegates come from to balance it? Are you with me? Otherwise, we're going to have a lopsided clergy to laity thing. Those extra clergy that are appointed or retired or serving in other capacities but not at a local church, those laity representatives come through the local churches called equalization. So Keller United Methodist Church might get an extra lay delegate, right? And so to count for all the retired clergy that are connected with the church. Does that make sense? So we go at pains to make sure that laity and clergy are well represented as best as possible in these large bodies, these large conferences throughout, from the annual conference to the jurisdiction conference to the general conference, all the way through. Okay? You may or may not know, but I am actually, from our annual conference, been elected as a clergy delegate to the general conference. I'm one of 4. So the reason I tell you that is that when we move through these general and jurisdictional conferences in 2024, I will definitely be making space to communicate to Keller United Methodist Church where we are with that. Kathy Ezell, anybody know Kathy Ezell? Excellent. Kathy Ezell is also delegate. So Keller United Methodist Church is uniquely, overly represented at the General Conference. We got 2 delegates. Are you with me? So our voice here carries a lot of weight. Now, I tell you this because this representation can you see how it connects back? Can you make any sort of connective tissues back to our Episcopal system, right? We have this kind of vertical level of accountability. If that's the case, why would we have any representation at all? Can you make any connective tissues between the Episcopal system, this vertical system of the bishops, district superintendents, local churches, pastors, and the valuing of laity in that system? Any thoughts? Yeah, so for those of you who are online or who are maybe couldn't hear, what she's articulating is the connection between having accountability and representation. And at that intersection, that's how the United Methodist Church structures itself. Can you think of an organization where it's just the elites that get together to talk about things? And that can become very far removed, right, from how things are on the ground, right? Or can you think of systems where it collapses the accountability and the representation on the same plane? Where does wisdom reside? Where does accountability reside? What happens if you can't see what you don't know, right? When we're all kind of flattened out. I know that I'm biased, but I believe that the United Methodist Church's system holds well the tension of representation and accountability in a framework that allows the church to move forward. That being said, we live in times that are incredibly difficult. Not that it's more difficult than other times, but it's tough. And that tension can create situations where the church may not be moving. So I want to give you a little story to highlight why that is important. We, I believe, in America, but perhaps universally humans, have an addiction towards movement. If we're not growing, we're dying. If you're not moving forward, you're stagnating or you're moving backwards. From a spiritual standpoint, that creates a very, very strong problem. Because you always have this sense that we've got to be moving, we've got to be changing, we've got to be evolving, or we're going to be left behind. It's a fear-based thing, right? If we're not solving problems, then what are we doing? Okay? So at the general church level, and all the way through the annual conference level, all those conferences, there's this motivation to get things done, to do things. We heard a brief illustration from our annual conference preacher this past week that I want to share with you that kind of highlights why that tension or why that motivation to go forward and to make movement is not always in our best spiritual sense. Maybe you've heard this story. A man hears a voice from God, and God says, I am calling you to push this rock. So the man says, great. Wakes up in the morning, pushes on the boulder, goes to sleep. Wakes up, pushes on the boulder, goes to sleep. He does this day in and day out for months. Months turn to years. Years turn to a point where the guy turns to God and says, man, I've been pushing on this rock for years, and it hasn't moved in the slightest. This is pointless. And God, according to the story, says, I called you to push the rock, not move it. Now look at yourself. Over these years, because you've pushed on this boulder, your back has gotten stronger, your legs have gotten more robust, your hands are callous. This work is preparatory. I've called you to push, not move the rock. Are you with me? So sometimes we have an addiction for movement so that we abandon our call that God has to push because we're not making progress. In the United Methodist Church, this representation and this accountability, these pieces as they come together, are a tension-filled space where some folks want to get moving all the time. And that creates some of, I believe, contributes to a number of our obstacles as a denomination. Some folks want to move really, really fast. Some folks aren't quite sure that we should be moving at all. So what do we do as a denomination when there's clergy that might want to charge ahead and lead big churches and go do things, and laity are like, I don't know if that's our call, you know? It contributes part of our denominational tension. And some folks don't really like that because it's unsettling. Are you with me? Within the United Methodist Church, I'll try to speak a little plainly, there are some activist groups who are representing different organizations or bodies or theologies that are working really hard to move the church in particular directions, left, right, center, whatever. And that's fine. However, there's also that group, those activist groups are sometimes met with some resistance to say, we're not quite sure that the church should be moving in those directions. And so every time we get together for a conference of any kind, there is that tension. Are you with me? This isn't right, this isn't wrong, this isn't good, this isn't bad. This is just how our denomination structure is kind of built. It's built to have the tension. It's built to have kind of those tensions within it. It's a feature, not a bug. Are you with me? And every time we take that feature out and treat it like a bug to our system, we will find either the diminishment of our Episcopal system or an elimination of a representative system.